All right. Well, welcome to another episode of the Medical Device Innovators Podcast. I have with me today Justin Bushko from Concise Engineering. Concise Engineering is a design group. I'm sure Justin will explain a lot more about what they do and how they do it, and how that relates to medical devices in particular here in just a moment. But welcome, Justin.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Good to see you again, Arlen.
And the first question, I guess, is kind of what was your journey? How did you get here? Where did you start off? What's your background? That sort of thing.
Sure. I'm an electrical engineer. I started off in industrial safety and the nuclear industry. Quickly then pivoted to medical device when I moved to Florida. I've been in medical device development for over 20 years. I worked for a company called Vanguard Medical, which is now the Stryker Sustainability Solutions facility. I worked for ConMed Limitech in various roles within service and repair, manufacturing, R&D, project management, and then kind of in their M&A aspects of due diligence and new product acquisition. And then I shifted into Smith & Nephew, where I worked for about 3.5 years in their wound care division, doing a lot of audit and investigation type activities, 62304 compliance, electrical product safety, 14971, and then being involved in FDA investigations and internal and external audits. And then at that point, we had a facility close, and I didn't want to go to the UK or to Texas. So I started my own consulting firm about 8 years ago, and have been actively addressing new product development for others, as well as for startups and established medical device companies that have been in the industry for a long time. So I've worked for ConMed and Medtronic and Stryker and Arthrex and a lot of other firms that are out there today.
Nice. Okay. So that was the main reason I wanted to have you on today is kind of your perspective as a consultant or someone that's brought in by a lot of different companies. You kind of get a view into the different ways different companies do product development, the way that they bring medical devices to market. You've seen what works, what doesn't work. I'm sure you've got stories of great success, as well as some of where you learned a lot along the way, we'll just say.
Absolutely.
And how that's different between the small startups versus working with some of the larger companies, for sure. So
yeah, there's definitely a lot of differences between the companies. As you're aware, there in some cases there's a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of paperwork to push things through, but that's med device anyway. That has to exist somewhere along the line. Others are kind of more Wild West and running as fast as possible, trying to get something on the market. And then you got to go backwards and dig them out of the hole by creating that additional paperwork, going through the testing, maybe again, because the first time might not have been documented appropriately. So there's a lot of different permutations that exist. I find in some of the larger companies, when they kind of treat it like a startup, they have the ability to accelerate things by outsourcing turnkey projects or turnkey subassemblies, and really kind of pushing that forward to get to a place where the product is de-risked and you're going to be able to be successful. Those things tend to help accelerate a project, but you never know if the bureaucracy is going to slow it down when it goes back and it lands on a shelf, or needs to spend another year to get packaged. So it gets interesting. Okay, so
have you found that that's a successful route for some of the larger companies, is to start treating it as, kind of approach it from a startup standpoint and dividing it up into sub-assemblies, that sort of thing? And
I think the more they leave it internal, the pieces that they need to keep internal are the ones where they're actually adding a ton of value from subject matter expertise, where they have an algorithm or a particular type of technology where they have developed, in-house organic experts. That's where they need to keep those things, and everything else that's kind of cookie cutter in any way, get it off their plate, because it's not going to add any value for them to worry about the nuances of a plastic injection insert or handle that doesn't really influence the implant or something along those lines. So there's a lot of places where they're wasting internal staff if they keep it inside. So sending those things out to a house that knows how to take care of that stuff will definitely advance things much more quickly and keep their staff focused on what's really important for where they've been trained and what they need to address.
So you mentioned the documentation side, and you mentioned testing a little bit. How much of the overall process do you handle as Concise Engineering versus things that you would have others take on?
Yeah, so it really depends on the project and how the company is structured. So if we're working with a large firm, Smith and Nephew or Medtronic or Stryker or something like that. Typically, they're going to have processes in place that they want to address certain things. They want to get the approvals through their 4 or 5 different working groups for regulatory quality, et cetera. So they're going to want to do a lot of the in-house stuff, and we're going to do more of the technical documentation that would address the technical side of documentation. So it would be updating your requirements, making sure they're distilled into the lower permutations, and then addressing test protocols, testing to support those. But getting that stuff approved normally goes back through the normal process. Now, if it's a smaller startup and it's just a couple business guys or a couple doctors, we take the initial clinical or user needs from those couple guys, or possibly hire an outside party to gather some of that, or we gather some of that. And then from there, we distill the requirements from user needs to engineering requirements to test requirements all the way through. And we do all that in-house and document that and then turn it around into a design history file or 510K and PMA. So
it really sounds like you're doing a lot of this on a custom basis for depending on what the needs are of your particular customer, and then kind of building that partnership between your group and what they've already got built in-house.
Yeah, absolutely. We can work within our own QMS system, or we can work within a QMS system of somebody else. If they have dedicated teams or they've already hired specific resources, then we integrate with those teams and draw the borders for where we fit and what we're supposed to be doing according to those statements of work. And each one is done differently. There are some where we're not in charge of risk management, others where we are in charge of risk management, some where they have people doing the DHF and the regulatory filings, others where we're doing those things and they're doing the technical work. So it's we have a plug and play team, and we build a team custom for each individual client, and we look at the resources that they need. And we don't necessarily apply all the folks that we have or we use all the time today. We go find the resources that fit the need of that project and then build that team around them.
Nice. Okay. So with that viewpoint that you have of multiple projects in multiple companies, you kind of get a feel for the industry as a whole. How did let's say the pandemic really affect the development of new devices? And as we're coming out of that, what sort of changes are you seeing in the medical device industry?
Yeah, so definitely the pandemic influenced a lot of things. One is, people focused in areas where they never focused before, right? So they're shifting into PPE or respiratory equipment and things like that. We experienced some of those as far as additional quotes and things in those areas. Not something we really wanted to get into because it wasn't, I don't like the ebb and flow of, maybe it's a win, right? So I want something I know is going to take off and sustain itself. So we did see some of those things. We lost a few projects in general due to the downturn in staff and, people working remote. But at the same time, we gained new projects from, bigger companies, bigger consulting firms, shifting their resources, and some of the smaller startups pulling out of different areas and pushing into this, going more local. So we really didn't see a major shift internally as far as business, but we did see a lot of ebb and flow on the types of projects coming in and out. Obviously, as you know, that supply chain has been crazy. Semiconductor industry, we lost a lot of stuff. So I've seen a lot of redesign work where a processor is obsolete or you can't get it for 99 plus weeks. And, you've got to basically take the existing product that's been designed and respin the boards, port the software and get that thing back up and running. Sometimes, the products are already V&V tested. So now you got to kind of go through that process as well, or start to work through justification. So a lot of challenges there. They do seem to be getting resolved. And also, one good thing I think that comes out of this is everybody's realizing that supply chain is important. So if you're going to design something, people are now investing in some silicone ahead of time. Make sure they have what they need for V&V. Maybe the first production runs to get them at least to revenue on that particular product line. So that's good.
So is there a difference between the larger companies and the smaller ones in terms of facing the uncertainty of the market today? Do you see a difference in approach?
Yeah, I think in supply chain, there's definitely a difference, right? Some of the larger companies know what to expect. They have large supply chain networks that are managing that stuff. And it's just the R&D team's internal risk reductions to be looking at buying, a couple thousand parts or something along those lines. The startups is where it gets tricky because they don't have that staff. And that kind of then pushes that onto us as looking at how do we help them with supply chain? How do we make sure that they can get across the finish line and not be short? So early stage in the design, we start to detail those items. Of course, this has always been the factor, right? You're going to pick something that you think is going to be on the market for 7 years, somehow tied to automotive or whatever. It doesn't really work anymore. So you hope it's still going to be around, but you still can make those good decisions, but you want to make sure you've got the parts that you need because they may not be available in 2 to 3 months. Because we saw where the automotive industry would take, several million parts that were available, and then there were none. So it's definitely tricky.
So in the short time that we've talked already this morning, we've talked about design work, we've talked about QMS, we've talked about documentation in all sorts of different forms. We talked about supply chain. I imagine if I was someone with an idea for a medical device that was just listening to this podcast, that it would start to sound a bit overwhelming in terms of, I'm not an expert in any of those areas. I just have an idea for something that's, clinically relevant that might change the way that certain treatments are done. I'd really love to figure out how to get that to market, but I don't know anything about the regulatory side or the QMS side. What part of what you do is that education for those smaller clients?
Yeah, I think on some of the aspects of what you're describing, there are kind of smaller, almost kind of cookie cutter processes that can be addressed. For example, on a early stage regulatory pathway for a product, like what is this product? Is it class 1, class 2, class 3? How do we do that? The EU wants to see a regulatory strategy document. The FDA is leaning in that direction too. So we can put together that regulatory strategy document that's, probably between 20 and 25 pages long, describes what it is needs to be done, the types of the classification it is, the codes that are likely to be used or considered, and then the types of testing that generally exist within those filings. And that gives you a pretty good idea of how do you get onto market. Same type of thing when you get into the next phases. Have you already done your patents? If you've done patents, great. If you haven't, we need to start to consider how are you going to block others. We don't want to just patent your one concept. We want to patent 15 or 20 ideas related to your concept so that nobody can work around you very easily. Generally, I have them work with their patent attorneys. We have some that we can recommend as well, but those things are important on the early stages. And then one thing I always want to really kind of push on is what's the volume going to be, right? If you have this thing and like you're a surgeon and you're going to use this like twice a month, is that going to make any money for anybody? If you're doing 100 cases or 60 cases or 80 cases and you're going to use this maybe twice a month, you're talking about a niche product, and we really need to understand does that niche translate into other operations, other surgeries so that you will have volume? Because if not, that's a really tricky sell for anybody. Nobody's really going to want to license that. The big players don't want to touch anything under 50 or $100 million in revenue. So it gets really tricky on how you get those niche products to market.
And what are those kinds of questions? I mean, besides the market and the regulatory side of things, what sort of things would you want someone to have thought about before they start working with you?
Yeah, other things related to clinical access and the ecosystem of the product itself, right? So if you have a product that you know will be used in a particular situation, but in order to use it, you also have to have this type of kit, this type of sterilization tray, this type of imaging equipment for it to be used. If you are not integrating all those pieces together, you may find that you can't deliver the service at all without a couple other products involved in the mix. And then if you focus on that, unless you find the perfect partner that has everything else, that product also can't get to market. That ecosystem is paramount to making sure that you have the ability to have success. And it could be that, you know, your one idea really needs 10 different SKUs to be successful. And you need to look at those things to figure out how to access that market.
So as we go forward into the rest of the 2020s and kind of the next 5-10 years, what sort of things do you see changing? What's changed in the way things have been done in the 8 years that you've been involved as a consultant, and then kind of where do you see things going from here?
Well, I definitely see all the big regulation changes that are happening, right? The FDA is transitioning from its existing mechanisms for CFR over to 1345. That's going to continue to pursue. MDSAP is out there. EU MDR is continuing to progress, even though it keeps getting delayed. So the amount of paperwork needed is continuing to increase. I'm finding that more and more folks are finding ways to leverage outside firms to take care of that, almost like a tax service, right? Somebody go do this for me because I don't care. I want it to get done. But I don't want to distract all my people inside that know what needs to be done for the detailed technical aspects. So we've seen a lot of plug-in helping out with documentation from an NPD perspective, supporting them and protecting the NPD teams from QA and RA regulations. So I see that continuing to shift. There's definitely a lot of outsourcing of line extensions and relatively simple projects because they want to keep focused on the next big thing where they think they're going to develop another 50 or $100 million market, and they're staying focused on those. In general, we're seeing a lot of shift to digital health. Everybody is trying to collect data somewhere and transfer that to the cloud or make it accessible on a phone app or through some type of report to a clinician. So you're going to see that continue, especially in the bigger realms like wound care and the diabetic market. Those things are always out there, and they're going to continue to shift more and more to prevention and compliance and just having that data available. And the bigger players are getting involved now. So Google and Apple and those guys are making a push in the digital world and getting legitimate credibility from the FDA. So you're going to see a lot of shifts. It'll be interesting to see how the FDA keeps up, because all this wearable tech will be on the fringes like Fitbit and those things. They were right on the edge of their claims, and they're all going to start to get inundated with the FDA is going to get inundated with those requests of following up with these things.
Yeah, I noticed that as Apple, was advertising their EKG and other, their pulse oximetry and things like that were built into their watch. I was looking at that as, these are full blown medical devices at this point. Inside consumer electronics, which I'm sure is a new challenge not only for Apple but also for the regulatory agencies to.
And it's a new challenge and it's a new challenge for new users, right? If you wanted to develop a watch that really was an EKG that was not a consumer product, they just raised the bar because they've got hundreds of thousands of data points that were already in existence because of the number of watches out there. So they raised that bar for your data requirements. Whether you realize it or not, it's those bars are consistently being increased by the FDA. Well, the last one had 500,000 data points and you have 20. Like, that doesn't work.
Yeah. So when you're going, you almost have to look at Apple and those larger organizations as a competitor that are increasing the requirements because of what the regulatory agencies start to expect based on what they're doing, and that increases the cost, the time, and all sorts of things for you as a smaller company hoping to
absolutely. Absolutely. We saw a big shift in that in reprocessing. Processing really started to get regulated back in like early 2000s. And as they shifted that, requiring 510Ks for reprocessed processes, the cleaning and the removal of debris, et cetera, those things have dramatically increased over time rather than, a couple hundred samples to sometimes 20, 30,000 samples through those processes to show and demonstrate that cleanliness. And it's very hard to say, well, mine, I only have 500 on the market. How am I going to get 30,000 data points? It gets very tricky. And we've seen the same thing on the EU MDR side, right? Clinical data that is used for post-market surveillance or clinical evaluation reports. If you don't have your product being used significantly in the US or in Europe, and then referencing your own data, it's getting trickier to reference competitors' data and kind of justify yourself through clinical evaluation of the literature that's out there. They really want to see proof that your product works and your clinical outcomes. And that's becoming a headache. And I think one of the main reasons the EU MDR is being delayed because they would take a lot of products off the market.
So it sounds like a lot of these are moving targets for you. Is this, a strength of your organization in that you kind of keep track of all of these things so that as these clients come your way, you know where the new pitfalls might possibly be?
We definitely know where some of them are. We keep track of that. We're engaged in 510Ks, PMAs, Q sub meetings. So we know some of those things, maybe through another client or through something that's recently been approved. I'm also tied in very well with the industry in general. So I talk to other, in essence, people that work in regulatory and quality that recently got something else approved and figure out where those bars have been raised. So we are in tune with those, and we definitely can contribute to that. But there's always something where you're like, and that's the best that we can tell you because we don't know if the FDA is moving the bar again. One of the things that you probably know is the cybersecurity stuff, right? So that keeps getting changed, but they're actually following guidance that's not really even published or accepted yet, and that's being pushed in new 510Ks. So you got to stay in tune with guidance and proposed guidance because you never know when they're going to start to utilize it as an essence law.
Yeah, and a lot of times those are conversations with those regulatory bodies, rather than just waiting for things to come down from on high. You really need to get out in front of it and have those pre-sub meetings and things like that to make sure that you're headed on a path that they understand and they agree with. And if not, working with them more as a partner than an adversary and trying to come up with a good path forward for your particular device. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's not uncommon to have that conversation with them and have them say, we're kind of moving in this direction, and currently you'll be the first. Yes. So it's like, great, that's awesome. Let's figure out how to do this.
Yeah, for sure. So if I'm a larger company and I, for the first time, want to start outsourcing some of these things, what preparations would I make on my end to make that a successful transition to bringing in a group like yours to do some of those turnkey components or those things that we were talking about earlier? What sort of preparation makes for a good partnership?
Yeah. Well, I think obviously there's a lot of contracts and stuff that go into place that typically is already set up by the companies. I think it's really data transfer and being open about what you're going to be able to provide. The more you can provide, the 2D drawings, the 3D CAD, those things make that transition much easier. The full design history files and some of the risk management files, those things make it easier to really understand where were you when you figured this stuff out the first time. And then if you haven't tried, like product's been around for 20 years, tell us, right? Like be open and honest, like, yeah, these files are not ideal and they all need to be revised. Don't take it for granted, because a lot of people try to stand behind legacy stuff and they know it's not good. They know it's not going to make it through the FDA when they come back through. So being open and honest at the beginning lets everybody understand how much work is really there to fix and correct those things. Also, when you're making that selection, I think the biggest thing is really understanding who's going to be put on your team, right? As I mentioned, we kind of custom bake our team, select the folks that we know are going to fit the team, and we plug and play as needed. So we're not going to put 5 college interns on your project 40 hours a week and bill them like senior level guys. We're going to put senior level guys that know what they're doing, and they might work 5 hours here and 5 hours there, and whatever is necessary to make that work. So we can put sometimes 5, 6 heads on a project and it ends up charging like 1.5 to 2 heads, but you have that experience of that group that can have those high level conversations and push back and forth on each other, rather than hiring an individual or one guy with 5 or 6 interns. So it gets pretty tricky to understand, because the big players, you never know what they're going to do on the team, and they charge way more when they're billing 6 heads instead of 2. So
yeah, for sure. So if that's kind of the approach, if you're a larger organization looking to outsource something, if you're someone that's never done this before and looking to find a partner to help you bring your ideas to reality, what's some good tips for making that a success?
Well, I think initially, don't let that like the bureaucracy kind of push you. A lot of times they're thinking, I got to pick the big guys we used last time because that's the easy and safe play. But I mean, you can fail pretty hard with a big guy and lose a couple $1 million. And then you got to justify why you think you got somewhere. So it gets really tricky to make those conversations work. So I just be open and honest to everybody, have them quote your projects, compare your quotes to the various folks, and understand the types of people that they're going to put on it. I've had people request resumes or meetings with 8 or 10 people on a call to see who are these types of people that are going to be involved in these projects. And I think that's important to understand. Just dealing with a sales guy or a project manager is not always going to answer those questions for you.
And get to the point where you really understand what's being offered and what parts are being covered and what they expect of you as the client. And I mean, all of those things tend to be very key,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, and actually, from a consultant perspective, there are a lot of larger firms or just other firms similar to ours that offer direction and guidance, where we actually say, here's the different ways we can approach it. Here's the strategy we want to take. And we believe we should go in this direction, and then we'll just actually go do the work. So we're not saying you should do this. Let us know when you update it. We're saying we should do this. We'll tell you when it's done. So being deliverable oriented and creating that content and that output for the clients is something that not all firms will do. And not all firms understand medical. So a lot of them will do something that is, it's good engineering practice, but it doesn't meet the medical side of things, because they're two distinctly different ways of doing things. One is to satisfy the FDA for safety and efficacy. The other is good engineering design practice, and you hope that you merge both of those in your process.
Yeah, for sure. Kind of like we were talking about earlier with the consumer electronics versus medical devices, right? So
yeah, absolutely.
Different sets of rules for sure. Yeah. So if someone's interested in learning more about how you might be able to help them with a project, or just really want to bounce an idea off of you, where do they find you, or how do they get a hold of you?
So we've got a website, or they can call us direct. You can always find me on LinkedIn as well. And, I'm typically the first discussion point. So we'll set up a call, go through your types of projects, generally what you're doing. At that point, we're usually going to want to go a little deeper. So then we'll do an NDA, and then we can start to look at some of the actual CAD or renderings or whatever else is necessary, and push further into where your pitfalls are, what resources you need, and really help build out a customized statement of work for your project and where we fit into that puzzle. Because each one is different, and we approach it that way.
Nice. And finally, you cover a wide range of types of projects and things, from a size to, kind of what's being taken on. Are there things that you don't do that you would suggest that you have recommendations for others to kind of take on?
Yeah, there are definitely projects that we kind of don't have that skill set for. Sometimes we'll research to see if we can find that skill set. And other times we just say, nope, let's go talk to this other partner. And we know folks in those areas that we don't specialize in. So if you've got a project and it doesn't fit our mold, we'll know somebody to recommend it to. And we can go as far as, critical care, ICU equipment, catheters and heart stuff, electrophysiology, pacemakers. Like, we don't necessarily do all that stuff, but we have the recommendations to push in that direction. We do a lot of sports medicine, orthopedics, a lot of surgical tools and OR equipment, and a lot of wearables and data collection aspects. So we cover a broad range of products, and we have a heavy team in mechanical, electrical, firmware, software, and mobile apps. And we can build that whole ecosystem around an individual product idea, as we were mentioning before. So definitely can tie in the right folks. And then we know people like yourself that do simulation and pull in the right folks where they're needed. So definitely a lot of people in our network, and we can help connect the dots.
Yeah, I think that network is a key part of all of this. That really being able to help people out and point them in the right direction for the things that you don't do. Because none of us can be an expert in everything, right? So
no, I know, absolutely. That. Yeah, and we do a lot of stuff in networking into components and manufacturing and different types of coatings and plastics and different types of materials. And so even in those areas, as long as you don't go too far into in vitro diagnostics and things like that, I still have good contacts there and a supplier level. But actually mentioning that, I just made some great connections in IBD recently, so I probably could make some great introductions there as well.
Nice. Very good. Well, I appreciate you coming on today and giving kind of a view into what it means to work with an outside group to bring these projects to reality, whether they're subcomponents of a larger system, for the bigger manufacturers, or like we said, a surgeon or two docs with an idea that want to bring it to reality. I think there's certainly a wide range of applications there, and appreciate your viewpoint for sure. So thanks very much.
Yeah, I appreciate the time to talk through this. It's there's a lot to talk about. So, and each conversation is different. So it's always good to be involved in many different conversations.
Yeah, for sure. So thanks very much, and we'll have you on again.
All right. Well, I appreciate it. Thanks, Arlen. It's good to see you.
Thanks.